Great, thanks very much, Simon, and thanks everyone for tuning in tonight. Sorry I can't be with you live in person as I'd like to be, but this is the second best option, but hope you enjoy it. So this evening I'm going to talk to you, the talk's entitled Mandarins, Admirals and Devil's Fingers, and it's a collection of wildlife stories, including these particular subjects and a few others. The talk will last about 45-50 minutes. And I'll start by giving you a brief introduction to myself and then take you through these subjects. Okay, so for those who don't know me, I live in Buffersley, just on the southern edge of Dartmoor. Originally, I grew up on Hayling Island in Hampshire, and then I moved down to the West Country to work for, to go to college at Falmouth School of Art in the late 1980s. And then I ended up working as a graphic designer at Dartmoor National Park for several years. And now I work as a freelance wildlife ecologist. I live with my wife, Joyce, and our youngest son, Oscar. My eldest son, Barnaby, lives in Vienna. My wife's a teacher. She teaches A-level criminology and psychology at Coombshead College in Newton Abbot. And she's also a keen taiko drummer. Son Barnaby, our eldest son Barnaby, is a computer programmer and hurdy-gurdy maker, and he has his own shop on one of the main streets in Vienna. So if you get a chance to get back to Vienna, pop in and see him. And our youngest son Oscar, he's a keen mountain biker and he likes outdoor stuff, fishing, and he's currently working in Chudley making electric motors. I've been a keen naturalist all my life, really. Ever since I was about 3 years old, I've been fascinated by the natural world, and that's carried on to this day. I like to explore the natural world through drawing and painting. This is me out actually in Sweden a couple of years ago, just before the lockdown, watching some northern long-tailed tits in the woods there. And these were those that I was drawing. So just before the lockdown happened, I managed to get out there. When I'm painting, I always draw and paint. I do take a lot of photographs these days, but I always draw and paint from life in the field. And I just use a bare minimum kit, really. So a few tubes of watercolour, some pencils and palette, and go from there, really. Got a few bits of paper and work very quickly and work in the field. So this is a quick time lapse, hopefully this will work, showing a painting in action. So each painting, there's a lot of the time is spent actually making the observations, but the painting can take, anywhere between an hour and 2 hours to complete. So obviously speed it up here, mixing the colours and putting it in there, and that's the final painting. And this was just in the woods at this time of year, actually about this time last year, as the leaves were colouring up on the willows. So I use these illustrations in a variety of ways. They're in various publications, and I also do a little section in the Dartmoor magazine in each issue. This is one of the recent ones about water stick insects. As I said, I take quite a lot of photographs now. Particularly with the advent of digital cameras over the last sort of 20 years or so, I've been able to use these cameras along with my field sketching and observation to record the wildlife. So at the moment, I use a Canon SX70 bridge camera, an Olympus tough camera, and I've just got this Sony RX10 Mark IV camera as well, which I've only just used a little bit, but I'll show you some shots from that later on. The little Olympus Tough camera, the TG6 camera, is an excellent little camera. It fits in your pocket, and the good thing about it is completely waterproof. So this is taking some pictures of some toads, and you can actually put the camera in the water with the toads and get some shots of them. Some toads. This one was actually up at Haytor Quarry where I took this shot. And also for taking video, it takes 4K video. And I think this was shown on Springwatch in the spring. This is just locally in Buckfordsley, and there was I found some white toad spawn. It was actually albino toad, tadpoles which came out of it. I didn't ever see if any of these developed into toads, but maybe in future years some white toads will come back and breed. So that's something I'd never seen before, but I did look it up, and it has been recorded before around the country. So as well as that, I work as an ecologist, mainly on entomology. I also do bird studies and things like that, but really my specialisms are in invertebrates. So this is one of the creatures I study, the horrid ground weaver. This is Britain's only endemic spider. So it's only ever been found in Plymouth, and it's only ever been found at just a handful of quarries as well. And there's only about 100, I think it's 143. I keep a tab of all the specimens ever seen. And there's only 143 actual spiders that have ever been seen. It's called a horrid ground weaver because it has, it's hairy really. Horrid means hairy, so that's why it has a hairy body. It's only a tiny little money spider, just a few millimeters long. And it's quite unusual because it's mainly active in the winter. So the peak time to see it is about Christmas time. So start on with the main section. I'm going to start with the mandarins. Now this is a pair of Mandarin ducks. Now these aren't native ducks, of course. They're from Asia, although they were imported into Europe about 150 years ago now for wildfowl collections, and inevitably some of them escaped, and they took to the British countryside and actually become established. They don't really compete with anything else. Not very much anyway, so they seem to have a little niche here, and a good population is built up, and they've spread to our part of the world as well, so they're fairly common around Dartmoor now. Where I watched them most actually was a few years ago. This is actually under the A38 at Buckfastleigh, and some people there were at that time were feeding ducks. They were feeding grain to ducks from their garden. And so this attracted a big flock of Mandarin ducks. And I think it actually ensured that more of them survived the winter, because this flock built up to about 100 birds. So you could go down, it was actually all weather drawing, go down there in the winter and just sit and watch these Mandarin ducks, because they'd sit on the far bank usually. And so they're able to watch them through the telescope or binoculars. And then occasionally they'd fly over to the bank where the houses were and feed on the grain. So you get a frenzy of Mandarin ducks feeding for a while, and then they'd fly back. But they even went into people's gardens. They're up onto the big gardens on the bird table. And these birds actually became fairly used to this as a habitat, because a friend of mine who died a few years ago but lived in Buckfast, he had Mandarin ducks coming into his garden. And obviously they cottoned on to using bird tables, and they came in. So quite an unusual garden bird table bird, the Mandarin duck. Rather nice to see. So I had lots of opportunities to draw them. Quite complex birds with lots of colours on, so to really mix up a lot of different colours before trying to paint them. The males anyway, the females are slightly easier, but lots of interesting poses. They are quite flamboyant birds, and the males like to show off, particularly late winter as the breeding season commences. They do like to do a lot of displaying with all their plumes. And this was one occasion when they were all sat all amongst the dead branches by the river with a little egret. Now, Mandarin ducks are hole nesting ducks, and we do have one other hole nesting duck around Dartmoor, and this is the Goose Sanders. And there's a Goose Sanders nest just up in this beech tree here. I did go and check it a few times. It was not the easiest tree to climb, actually, because I wouldn't recommend climbing beech trees, particularly when it's damp, because they're really slidey. I could climb up to this when it was dry. It was fairly safe, and I could look in there. But I remember one occasion and you could see into the hole here, and the female Goose Sanders was sitting on a nest there with all the down. But I remember one occasion when it was quite wet, and I sort of fell out of the tree. So I gave up climbing that tree after that. It wasn't really worth it. But when it was dry, it was fine. And I have actually since found another tree. I just would have climbed up and have a look in. So that's the female. And she'll sit on the eggs for about a month. And then when the young hatch, they've obviously got to jump out of that tree. So they remain in the nest for about 24 hours, and then they'll jump. So they obviously got to jump out maybe 10 meters or so, 5-10 meters, and bounce on the ground, and then join the female duck, and then head down on the water. So if you can catch them when they've just come out, you often see a scene like this where the young Goose Sanders ducklings are riding on the back of the female. Now, good spots to see it. They tend to sort of drift downstream. So places like Dartington in May, early June is a good place to see this. They tend to all sort of drift down there. So if you want to see a family party, maybe try around Dartington estate. Now, the Goose Sanders, which breed or spend the winter anyway around Dartmoor, tend to feed on the rivers during the daytime, but they go to roost on the reservoirs. So this is Venford Reservoir, but they go to all of the reservoirs to roost. So if you go there either very early in the morning, or as I tend to do, go at dusk, you often see quite large flocks of Goose Sanders coming in. And I spent a little while watching them sort of late winter this year. So this is in early March. And it was interesting to watch the birds, a little bit of video here, because they come in and they would, just before, as the pairs are meeting up, the males are quite often doing a bit of posturing to each other and chasing the females around. So it's a good time of year and a nice thing to do right at the end of the day, to watch these fabulous birds doing a little bit of display. So I recommend that, going up onto one of the reservoirs in the evening to watch the Goose Sanders. Now, the Mandarin Ducks are also hole nesting birds, and they will take the nest boxes as well, probably more readily than the Goose Sanders. So this is a nest box in Butterflies, and this has been regularly used by Mandarin Ducks. And here's the female. She's sat on a nest similar to the Goose Sander. She's plucked her down to make a nice warm snug nest there. She's sat incubating her eggs again for about a month. And that she rarely leaves it, I found. She's more often than not like the Goose Sander. When you look in the nest, she's sat on there, but in this occasion she had left. You can just see the eggs in there. And looked in this day, and all the ducklings had just hatched, so they're quite damp looking still. So they remain in there for about 24 hours, as I say, and then they'll jump out of the box. This was another box, actually, and they bred in this a couple of years ago, just a short distance from the first box I showed you. And this is one of these boxes, I think it's for a kestrel or a barn owl, but it has sloping sides. Now, the young Mandarin ducks have very sharp claws, and they're able to grip onto the sides and climb out of the hole. But in this occasion, it was not really the right shape for them. And so we knew the ducklings were in there, but they couldn't get out. So we actually opened the front up. And here's a little bit of video showing them jumping out. So as soon as we open the front up, they're ready to jump. And some of them are a little bit nervous about jumping, but others just, throwing themselves out. The mother is calling down below. And it's quite a distance for them to jump, but they bounce on the ground. And then the river is just a short distance from there, and they'll join the mother there and then swim off downstream. In this, this was the first nest box I showed you. When they jumped out of that, they were on a small lake, so they could remain on there for a day or two before usually they'll move off. So this was nice in amongst all the rhododendron flowers, which had just fallen off in May. And so this was all the ducklings being brooded by the mother, and a little bit of video of this as well. So this was about 10th of May, something like that, when I saw this. And then the female, I was watching her for a couple of days with the ducklings. And then one day I saw that she's moved, looking like she was going to move off the lake and go down onto the stream. So I set my camera up downstream and I managed to catch this. As all the ducklings headed off down the stream. Now, not many of them survive. I think out of those, it's usually one or two which will survive out of each brood because there's so many predators around and they're such easy prey. Various things like gulls and things like otters, I suppose, will take them as well. Now, this is up at Venford as well. Now, this was a few years ago when it was very, very dry in the autumn, and it remained dry right through October and right through November as well, until about the 20th of November. And then a named storm came through, and just within the space of the day, the reservoir rose this much. Now, this triggered an event which were perfect conditions for something which I've been trying to see. Well, I try and see every year if I can, but it's actually the movement of salmon up the river. Now, the salmon, this is in the River Tean, so the salmon will come in the autumn into the estuary, and then what they do is they wait until there's a big surge of water before moving up to their breeding grounds, which are up on the edge of the moor. So what happened, and the classic time to see this really is when you get a really long dry spell, and then it suddenly rains a lot. Usually it's sometime in October, but this went on and on, so it wasn't really until the end of November. But then all the rain came at once, then the water level was very high. So what I do is wait a couple of days for the salmon to get up to where I see them leaping, and then go and sit on a little weir. And this is just below Castle Drogo. And on this particular occasion, it was because all the fish were coming up at once, you couldn't really fail to get photos of them and video. There were hundreds of them jumping, or hundreds of fish leaping up. And the water level on the weir's just got to be at the right level. If it's too high, the fish can't jump up the weir. They still will jump out of the water. And as the water level lowers a little bit, they can just swim right through the white water, and just you don't see them jumping. So you just got to hit the right day and hopefully get it right. So that was in 2016, I think. Previous to that, there was a good day about 10 years before, but I managed to miss that well, my son was off school that day, sick, so I couldn't get down there. But I knew the conditions were good, and there were a lot of fish seen at Lockwell Down, which is another good place to see it. But on this occasion, I had lots of salmon. There's some big fish as well, jumping, and they tend to jump over the lower edge of the weir there. One of them actually even jumped out in front of the foremost rock and landed, almost hit me actually, and landed on the rocks right in front of me. It's a great big male salmon. Impressive things to see. This is a bit of video. This is using my new camera, my Sony RX10 Mark IV camera. And this camera's got one of these things where it's got an end trigger on it. So you can leave it running on the spot where you think something's going to happen. And then when something does happen, like a salmon leaps, I've got 4 seconds to press the button. And I've also set it so it's taking 250 frames a second. So I can using this, able to capture the salmon jumping out of the water. So this is in real time, so you hear the sound. And then this is in slow motion. So there's a salmon jumping up, and they tend to jump. So on this occasion, the water level is too high really for them to get up the weir, but they're still jumping out. You can see it's a huge white cauldron of water. And I love the sound there, just being enveloped by all the sound of the water, and seeing these magnificent fish jumping up. Really powerful. And you can see them just hanging in that water sometimes, jumping up, and the strength of them is amazing. They're all solid muscle. There's a male there with a sort of a hooked face on it. So it's great fun playing with the camera with this, because you couldn't fail to get the fish jumping, which is nice. And I did go back the next day as well and saw some more up until about the middle of the day, when the water level just lowered enough for the fish to be able to swim right through the weir. To my garden now. This is my garden bee hotel. Now this is a special hotel made by a company called Nurturing Nature. And in this bee hotel, you can actually lift out this section in the middle, and you're able to observe the bees inside. And a little bit of video here of a leafcutter bee. With a leaf. She'll use about 14 or 15 sections of leaf to make each nest cell. And it was great fun to watch her running along or walking along the tunnel there, carrying a leaf and then constructing the nest cells. And she didn't mind that it was open. Once she's building the nest in, they could just open it up and she'd carry on as normal. So it's an amazing opportunity to watch her at work. And this particular bee, this is a Willoughby's leafcutter bee, one of the larger ones. And she built 28 nest cells in the bee hotel in 3 or 4 different tunnels. So that was great to see. And I've got them all sat over the winter then, so hopefully I'll see what will emerge next year. Up onto the moor now, say meadow pipit, one of the commonest breeding birds on Dartmoor. And they nest low down on the ground in a tussock, usually, quite low down, usually raise, well, they raise 2 broods, one sort of April, May time and one sort of end of June, July. But they are the host for the cuckoo on Dartmoor. So this particular bird is not sitting on just her own eggs. She's been visited by a female cuckoo. Now the cuckoo will, the female cuckoo will sit around watching for meadow pipits up on the moor, and she'll spot a meadow pipit's nest and then work out where it is when it's being built. And then when the pipit is laying her eggs, and she'll lay 1 each morning for 4 days, sometimes she'll lay 5 eggs, usually 4. And during that period of time, the female cuckoo will go down to that nest in the afternoon. She'll take one of the pipit eggs out usually, and then quickly lay her own egg. Now this takes just a matter of seconds to complete this act. So here's a female cuckoo just sitting around, and this is a meadow pipit nest with a cuckoo egg in it. Maybe this nest had 5 eggs, or maybe just the cuckoo didn't take an egg out on this occasion. But you can see the cuckoo egg on the left there, top left, is quite remarkable because it also mimics the meadow pipit egg. This has evolved through the meadow pipits actually finding eggs they don't like in their nest and removing them. So over a long period of time, they've actually perfected their cuckoo's mimicry. But also the cuckoo's egg is much smaller in proportion to its body size than the meadow pipit's egg. And this is another trick it uses to fool its host into accepting that egg into its nest. And that's the cuckoo after it's left the nest. So you can see the cuckoo and the meadow pipit are, completely different sized birds. And you think by this stage, that meadow pipit would have realized that there was this cuckoo wasn't its own bird. But the cuckoo has a number of different techniques which it uses to fool the meadow pipits or whichever host bird they have. So this is actually in a tree pipit nest, this little bit of video. And this shows the newly hatched cuckoo, and she's actually ejected the chicks of the tree pipit, which had just hatched about the same time. So usually the cuckoo hatches before the host bird eggs hatch, usually after about 12 days, where the hosts take 14. But if the host eggs have hatched, then the cuckoo will eject these. And it has, although it's blind, it has a little dimple on its back, and it will eject anything in that nest. And once the eggs or the young are outside of the nest cup, the host bird female will completely ignore them. So she'll only feed things which are actually in her nest itself. So roll on 3 weeks now, and this is the same nest. So there's the tree pipit coming in with lots of food, and here's the cuckoo, so almost ready to fledge now. And it has this bright red gape which hypnotizes the tree pipit. So the tree pipits are constantly bringing in food for it. And also it has a call which sounds not just like one chick, but like about 4 or 5 chicks, and also keeps the nest clean by providing a fecal sac for the pipit to take away. So that's the cuckoo. So that's the first time I've seen a tree pipit cuckoo on Dartmoor. They're usually on meadow pipits. And there again, after the cuckoo has left the nest, the pipits will follow it around for another 2 or 3 weeks. And even in the end, they have to climb up its back to feed it. Quite an amazing thing to see. This was a photograph taken at Venford Reservoir a few years ago. Now in Britain, we have a number of butterflies which spend the winter as adult butterflies. Now, one of them is the Brimstone Butterflies. It's the longest lived adult butterfly in the UK. The adults can live for about a year. So they'll hatch in the summer, and then they often don't die off until sort of May, June time the following year. So they live almost 11 or sometimes almost 12 months. And so at this time of year, they actually hibernate amongst ivy and brambles as well. So they'll just sit under the leaves. They're not really hibernating as such. they're just overwintering because they're still active. They can still move around. They can't fly unless it's warm enough, but they can still walk and they can still move themselves about. Now, another butterfly which does this is the comma. And the comma doesn't live so long because it's as an adult, because it has two broods. So it has a summer brood which doesn't hibernate, and then the ones that emerge late summer, autumn, they will hibernate as adults. And these ones you often see feeding on blackberries, overripe blackberries in the autumn, and have this lovely ragged wing edge. And this is a clue to what they do in the winter. So a few years ago, a friend of mine, this is in 2018, a friend found this comma hibernating on a tree in South Devon. And it was on an oak tree and just sat on a little bit of ivy. So I'd never seen this before. I knew that they were recorded, just sat out. As it said, the book said they just sit on tree trunks right through the winter at the base of tree trunks amongst leaves. But I mean, I've looked, but I mean, it's a bit of an endless job really trying to needle in a haystack trying to find this. So I was very lucky that a friend found this. And on this occasion, it was originally on the right-hand side of this tree, but the bit of ivy that it was on actually got blown off in a bit of a gale, so it was hanging loose. And one day I was there on a very mild day in December, and the butterfly woke up and then it flew around the tree and then ended up flying to the left-hand end of this long horizontal branch in amongst all these dead oak leaves, which had been caught in the twigs. And there it remained, overwintering. So that was in December 2018. Then the following year, we didn't check the tree again, thinking, well, that's an amazing thing to see. But then a friend went back in December last year and found that in exactly the same spot, there were 3 commas hibernating. So obviously this tree is a bit of a magnet. It's the perfect place for commas to hibernate. So it was fabulous to see 3 of them, and also close together as well. Here's a photograph of them, so you can just make out there's 3 commas there. Sometimes even if you know they're there, you can look in there and think, well, where are they all? But if you didn't know they're there, it'd be very easy just to walk past and just think it's a mass of leaves. But fascinating to see them all sitting there. But they do move around a little bit in the winter. And so we went back, a friend Barry Henwood went back and had a look the other day, and lo and behold, there is one comma this year hibernating in exactly the same place on that tree. So amazing thing to find, something that you dream about seeing, and then just by chance someone finds it, and then you find this amazing bits of behaviour, the fact that they can actually return. They're not, obviously not related individuals, but they can return to exactly that same spot. Now, moving on to some admirals now, these are some red admirals and some commas which are attracted to sugar bait. A friend of mine put this sugar bait out in his garden near Ashburton in the autumn to try and attract the blue underwing or Clifton nonpareil moth, which he was successful in doing so. But during the daytime, it attracted huge numbers of red admirals. Up to 50 of these would appear and fly down and feed on this sugar solution. So it's really a mixture of sugar and a bit of wine or beer mixed up and then spread onto the log. Also attracted lots of wasps and quite a few honeybees in the end, and several commas. I was using my little Olympus tough camera, which does high-speed video as well. So I was doing some experiments with that and got this little bit of video. This is a bit of real time. And then in slow motion, again, this is about 250 frames a second. You can see how the butterflies are flying, the comma going by there. And see the wasps buzzing about. And some of the wasps and the hornets do actually attack, particularly the hornets will attack the red admirals and other insects and try and eat them. Here's a wasp having a go at that red admiral. I wasn't too happy about that. I didn't ever see a successful attack by a hornet, but I did record this. And the red admiral ward off the hornet by flicking its wings. And it's maybe making some kind of ultrasound there as well, as it's rasping its wings together. But on that occasion, it managed to persuade the hornet to go elsewhere. So the Red Admiral is a beautiful butterfly, one of our most familiar butterflies again. It's a migrant from Europe, although in recent years, more and more of them have been overwintering here. They're not they don't really go to sleep or over the winter as much as the commas and brimstone, so they're more often likely to wake up on mild days during the winter. And they do like to feed on blackberries again during the autumn. So this year, as I said, there were very large numbers, particularly in September, but they went on into October, and I still see them on any sunny days now. There's always a few around. This is one down at Prawl Point, actually egg laying. So this was in October, and she was egg laying on some nettles. So they like to choose the nice fresh nettle leaves, and they just lay a few of these tiny little green eggs on the nettles. And then the caterpillars, there's the eggs there, tiny little sculptured little green eggs. And the caterpillars like to feed in amongst some spun leaves of the nettles. So if you look on nettles, these are fairly common during the summer, particularly late summer. If you look on a patch of nettles and see a bunch of leaves like this, it's often going to contain, if you open it up, contain a Red Admiral caterpillar. This was actually up in Somerset at Ham Wall. And I was up there in the autumn. And I was just looking for some snails, actually, and I was just brushed against these nettles and grasses, and suddenly they all came to life, started vibrating. So I wondered what was inside there. And then I realized, was searching around, that it was actually a Red Admiral pupa, and it was obviously some sort of defense against predators. It would vigorously wriggle around, maybe to stop parasitoid wasps or other small mammals or something predating it. So that was quite an amazing thing to see. And after that, I collected a few caterpillars and reared some, and managed to see this one actually emerge. So this is a Red Admiral emerging. So the pupa is just splitting there as the butterfly is about to hatch out. See, they're pulling its antennae out and its tongue. Tongue is actually in two parts to start with, because they actually evolved. The tongue is evolved from some mandibles, so it's just a highly evolved mandible of a creature like a beetle. But in the butterflies and moths, they developed into a tube which zips together. It's made of a substance called resolin, which is a protein which is very good at returning to its previous shape. And then this is it pumping up its wings. So pumps the fluid through the veins of the wings and then expands them. And this whole process takes about half an hour, or maybe less actually, to actually pump the wings up, maybe 10, 15 minutes, but then sort of 3/4 of an hour to an hour before the wings are dry and ready for the butterfly to take off. This is the White Admiral. It's reasonably closely related to the Red Admiral, but not a very close relation. These are quite common around South Devon, particularly around Bovey Great Plantation, Stover Country Park, good places to see them. And lovely butterflies. They fly in late June, July, and have a beautiful gliding flight as they fly along the woodland rides and feed on things like bramble blossom. It's a good place to see them. The females lay their eggs on honeysuckle. They don't use honeysuckle which is out in the open. They always use rather honeysuckle which is growing in quite shaded situations. And this is because the honeysuckle, if you look at honeysuckle which grows out in the open, it's often got quite waxy leaves which are quite hard, and they're quite unpalatable really for a caterpillar of this butterfly. So the butterfly lays its eggs on those little spindly plants which are growing in amongst under the trees in the little shady spot. So there's a White Admiral egg, and there's the newly emerged caterpillar. And the first thing it does is eat the eggshell, and then it migrates along the edge of the leaf, right to the leaf tip. And this is actually the easiest stage to find them, by looking on bits of honeysuckle growing in these shaded situations, because it does an unusual thing. It first of all, at this stage, it covers itself in bits of poo, but it eats the leaf back from the tip and actually constructs a little extra pier on the central midrib of the leaf. and it sits on this when it's not feeding. So this is some sketches I did of this, just showing the process of how it does this. So it doesn't actually eat all the leaf to start with, it just cuts sections out and then makes this little pier. And then over the period of a week or so, it eats more and more of the leaf, and the pier gets noticeably longer, but the caterpillar always returns and sits on it. So it makes it very, very distinctive and easy to find, even though the caterpillar is just a tiny creature at this point, just a few millimeters long. And there's an example of a White Admiral caterpillar. This is sort of in late August time. And there it is. It also has a collection of leaves, which it flicks its poo into, and it this is little sections of cut leaf, and it moves this along the pier for some reason, some unknown reason. No one really knows quite why. And it does this for a while, and then eventually abandons doing that. And then by September time, late August, early September, it prepares to hibernate. So what it does then is it actually cuts the leaf into a section like this, curls it around, spins it up with some silk, and then it actually attaches the stem, the stalk of that leaf onto the main stem. You can see there's a few bits of silk there. And so when the leaf dies back in the winter, this remains of this leaf will stay in situ. And so you can find the caterpillars there, and there is the caterpillar. And it just sits out in the open quite often right through the winter. And there's one, just a few millimeters long. It must have antifreeze inside it because it just sat right in the open, right through the winter months. A little spiky brown thing, just a few millimeters long. So I mark these, and friend Barry Henwood and I mark these caterpillars. And then we go back in the spring and just see if we can watch them developing. And when they emerge in the springtime, they molt and they turn to green, spiky looking things, looking like something out of a tropical jungle, really. Rather beautiful caterpillars. And they feed up quite quickly by the end of May time. They'll feed up and be full grown. And then they prepare to pupate. So the caterpillar will find a suitable spot, usually up in amongst the honeysuckle, will attach itself by a silk pad at its tail end, and then it will hang down and change into a pupa. Now the pupa is quite amazing with these mirror markings, and it has these, it looks like an alien bat to me, with these beautiful green mirrors on its eyes, and reflects some of the colour from around it, and is amazingly well camouflaged. That's the White Admiral pupa. And then towards the end of June, it will emerge as a new adult butterfly. So there's the tiny caterpillar, and it's similar to another butterfly. It's more closely related to the purple emperor, which also has a similar caterpillar. Again, this one will hibernate. When it's quite small, then these ones feed on willows, sallows. And this is a purple emperor caterpillar during the winter, and it will just sit by a little bud there, and it's just sat there right through the winter. So easy prey for birds like long-tailed tits. If you watch them during the winter, as I spend a lot of time doing, you see them, they're often searching amongst the buds, looking for tiny moth eggs and things like the purple emperor caterpillar would make a nice meal for a long-tailed tit, and I'm sure a lot of them do get predated in that way. Now, the long-tailed tits I've been watching over the last 10 or so years. I've just been up this evening looking for them. I found they roost in particular spots. So this flock I've watched for about 10 years now, and I've noticed that in the winter they have actual particular bushes which they often return to roost. So this is one just out in an older buckthorn where they roost just in the open, and there they are all roosting at dusk. But they have other sites as well. And I found about 15 sites for this particular flock, usually in holly bushes, and they will gather to roost in the evening. The roost is formed by the two birds on the end, the subordinate birds in the flock forming the roost line, and then the other birds jumping into the middle. They don't want to get into the cold bits on the end. They all want a nice snug spot in the middle there. That's another flock in another, well, this flock again in one of their other holly bush roosts. But I have, as well as watching the ones at Henbury Woods, I've watched a number of flocks in my local area. This is one which roosts in a a little pine plantation, a little spruce tree, and some others. This is again in a holly. One's in a holly in Henbury Woods, nicely shown there. But others nest in roost in rhododendrons and bits of ivy and buddleias as well. I've had them roosting in. Now, long-tailed tits, early breeding birds, so they're nesting in early March. And here's a little bit of video of them from about the 1st of March this year. So usually first nice days in March, I can go out and often find several long-tailed tit nests because they all start building about the same time. And they weave their nests out of lichen, mosses, and spider silk, which is actually collected from spider egg cocoons, which they find, and they spin this together. And again, this is the same morning, and this is another pair of long-tailed tits that just started their nest. So this is just the first little pieces of moss and spiders' webs going down just to form the base of the nest. And the nest can take a couple of weeks to build. And then once the dome shape of the nest is made, then they'll collect a lot of feathers to line it with, sometimes up to about 800 feathers. And there's the female incubating the eggs inside. And then once the young hatch, they're fed in the nest for about 17 days. And these ones are almost ready to fledge. And then feeding on a diet, a lot of caterpillars and flies and things like that are taken in by the adults. And these are some literally just a day or so before they fledged. I usually return to look for them each autumn. So these again, this is the picture I showed you earlier from about this time last year. And watch them again through the woods. Now, I spend a lot of time out in the woods and see all sorts of things and out and about. Sometimes things just happen unexpectedly. Now, this was in March this year. I was just wandering back through the woods in Henbury Woods, and I just literally just about to go through the gate, and I suddenly heard a whoosh beside me, and then this happened. A sparrowhawk had just caught a blackbird, literally just a few feet away from me, a male sparrowhawk, so quite big prey for a male sparrowhawk to deal with. Jumping around a bit, the blackbird obviously wasn't too happy about this. Then eventually the sparrowhawk killed the blackbird, and then it flipped off, flew a short distance, and I was able to follow it. Unfortunately, it was right about a plastic bottle someone had thrown down. But then it was quite oblivious to me. I approached it within just a few meters, and I was able to watch it feeding on the blackbird. It seemed quite oblivious to me. You know, it was quite nervous about people walking by because the road was just a few feet away, and it was looking around when people went by on the road, but it seemed to be quite happy with me watching it. Amazing thing to see, incredible eyes on it. So, it's one of those special moments. Doesn't happen too often. This is down in the sewage farm in Buckley. During the winter, you can see why a lot of birds get attracted to this place, because there's a mass of little midges that breed in the sewage open pans filter beds there, and there's huge numbers of insects. So it obviously attracts a lot of birds which come in to feed on these. And when it's cold in the winter, you can sometimes see up to 100 goldcrests there when it's very cold, and lots of other birds as well will come and feed on those pans. So it was a good place to watch goldcrests, and I spent a bit of time very early this year watching them. Just by the sewage works there. And one night I was up in Henbury Woods looking for the long-tailed tits, and I came across this, and I'd heard about this before, I'd never seen it, and it was actually two goldcrests roosting together. And I went back the following morning, and this is them waking up and leaving the roost about 7:15 in the morning. So they obviously snuggle up together, usually just two birds. These them just stretching after they're roosting together in the holly. And then moving off for the day. They didn't come back to the same spot again in the evening. So that was just a bit of a lucky one-off chance, I think, to see that. I've been seeing them. I often do see pairs of goldcrests in the evening. You see two birds together, just as it's getting, it's almost impossible to follow them. They just vanish into the darkness, but they're obviously roosting like that when you see these. Now I've seen that. I know what's happening. On to some adders. This is up on the moor. So it's the male adder just emerged in the spring. About early April, they molt, and then the females emerge at this time of year. And if they're going to breed, then the female will produce a pheromone scent, attract the males in. And this is a male guarding a female. But if another male turns up, you'll get this thing called the dance of the adders. Now, I haven't seen this for many years, but I was lucky enough to get this little bit of video this year. This was about the 8th of April, something like that. And these are two males fighting over a female. So it's called the dance of the adders, but it's really a wrestling match between two male adders. And if they're well matched like this, in this case, this can go on for about a quarter of an hour. And they're completely oblivious to me being there, and they'll come right out into the open. So quite a mesmerising thing to watch, the dance of the adders. Once you've seen it, I just always want to see it again the following year. Now, the object of this is to force your opponent's head down on the ground like that, and then that's the victor, and then that's the strongest adder, and he'll go back to the female. Now, on to the devil's fingers now. This is up on Newbridge Hill at this time of year. And if you look in amongst the grasses there, then you may see these alien eggs. And after a few days, they go translucent. And then this strange octopus or devil's fingers fungus emerges. It's not a native to the UK, it actually originated in Australia. But these spores have been imported maybe with plants last century. And they've established themselves across the wide area of England now. And Dartmoor is one of the places where you can find them. They have this sticky brown gunk on them, which is called gleba, which smells pretty awful. And it attracts flies, which the gleba contains the spores of fungus. So the flies come and feed on it and then take those spores around the countryside and spread it around. So there's a devil's fingers, and it's about the size of my hand. So a reasonable size thing, and it looks a bit like a starfish in amongst the grass. And there's one attracting a whole bunch of flies. Now we have other native members of this family, and this is the stinkhorn, and they also come out of eggs in the same way. They feed on dead wood. I think the devil's fingers is feeding on dead bits of burnt gorse, because it's often in areas which have been burnt a few years before. And this is a little bit of time lapse of a stinkhorn emerging. It takes about 12, 14 hours for it to emerge from the egg. Usually this takes place at night. The head there in this case is covered in this brown gunk, this gleba. And then often you find the stinkhorns and they're like the picture on the right there, and all the gleba is gone. So I was quite interested to know how quickly it took the flies to remove it. So I spotted one early in the morning and then waited for the flies to appear and got this little bit of time-lapse video of the flies. And it doesn't take long. The flies appear out of nowhere with green bottles and quickly suck up all this stuff. They obviously love it. And it took about 3/4 of an hour, so much quicker than I expected. I thought it may take a couple of hours, but it only took less than an hour for the flies to come in and remove all the spores from the fungus. So that's that fungus's job done. And they seem to always work from the top down to the bottom of the fungus as well. There we go. Now, there are some other relatives of these, the devil's fingers. Again, these are more often found in continental Europe, but they're also found in Britain. And this is down at Berry Head, and this is the red cage fungus. And again, this is another member of the stinkhorn family. So it has the same method of spreading its spores. So it uses this brown gunk to attract flies, which then take the spores around the countryside. There's a shot of that. So that was in October. I have seen them in July before, so they can pop up at any time during the warmer months of the year. Okay, well, that's the end of the talk. It's about on time as well. So thank you very much for listening. And if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, John. That's absolutely fascinating and amazing pictures, both your photographs and your beautiful paintings as well. I really enjoyed seeing those. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand over to John now, and I think he's collected a few questions for you, hopefully.
Okay, thank you.
John, can we activate your video?
Okay, yeah, I certainly can.
There we go.
Right. Okie dokie. Yeah, if people want to type in their questions as we're talking, I've got a number of questions from Simon here. So, so if you want to type in your questions, I'm sure there are plenty from that extensive tour that we've just had. First one from Simon. I saw a comet laying eggs on an elm hedge this year. Is this a recognised food plant as well as nettles?
Yes, yeah, they do. Yeah, they feed on elms and hop as well. They'll feed on, yeah, as well as nettles. Yeah, that is a. Yeah, okay. The caterpillars are rather nice if you see them. They look like they've got bits of emulsion paint splashed on the back of them. They're like little spiky things, so they're brown, but with this distinctive, very white patches on them. So it's worth looking out for those.
When would you expect to see those, John?
You see them, well, I most often come across them in sort of August time, but you can see them earlier in the year as well, probably in June with the summer brood, sort of May, June time, and then again in August. But I see them generally more frequently in August.
Okay.
And another one for Simon. I have some sealed cells in my bee hotel, perhaps 2 to 3 millimeters diameter. Do you know what they're likely to be?
I don't know. Could be a number of things. There's some tiny little bees called Hylaeus, which make very, very small cells. The bees are only 4 or 5 millimeters long, so possibly those. But there's various little bees and little solitary wasps as well, which will nest in your bee hotel. So if you have bee hotels, if you make them yourself, it's always worth making holes anywhere from about 12 millimeter diameter down to about 2-3 millimeters diameter, and all stages in between, because there's so many different species which will use them of all different shapes and sizes. Suitable for different shapes and sizes. Yeah. Okay. Again from Simon. I often get tortoise shells and other nymphalids indoors, woken up by the central heating. What's the best thing to do with them? Should one try to feed them or put them outside? Yeah, it's best. I mean, they come into houses because they want to come into like a cave or an outhouse or something like that. They think it is, but the heating obviously wakes them up. The best thing is to put them in a shed or a garage or somewhere like that, rather than in the house, because once they warm up and use their energy, they're more likely to exhaust themselves and die. Yeah. And what they're trying to find is somewhere which is stable and damp. So I often put larvae in our shed, or there's some nearby caves here which you can pop them in. Right. Which is ideal. Nice, really. Stable. Yeah, nice, stable. Cold, but not freezing. Yeah. Damp, but not too wet and not too dry. So it's just the right sort of conditions. Mm-hmm. A question here from Tom Morris on the technical side. Which camera do you use for macro photos, close-ups? Have you any experience? Have you got any experience of macro lens attachments onto mobile phones? I haven't actually, no. I mean, I use those cameras. I mean, I'm not really sort of technical camera person. I tend to just use these cameras which I found. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the macro stuff I used, my Canon SX70 and my little Olympus Tough TG6 for the real close-up stuff, things like ants and the caterpillars, and the White Admiral just hatched from its egg, because particularly the TG6 is the Olympus, and as TG5 is just as good, are very good at getting those real close-up macro shots. It has a special microscope setting on, so I use that for getting those shots. Oh, that's good.
Here we go from Rebecca Gethin. Thanks so much for the talk and the pictures. I wondered what happened to our bee hotel. All the cells were full, and then last month they were empty. Any ideas?
Hello, Rebecca. I don't know, actually. It depends where it was situated. I mean, sometimes woodpeckers can get into them, and they do have long tongues, and they can, if they find them. I did see some recently which have been attacked by woodpeckers. But if all the cells are in there, it would have to really be something like that. I mean, spiders or sometimes woodlice can get into them and munch them, but there'd usually be something left of the cells themselves. So I don't know. I'd have to have a look at it really, or if you could send me a picture of it, maybe that would help.
Yeah, great spotted woodpeckers have got a lot to answer for, really, haven't they? They seem to predate on a lot of things.
Yeah, they do. Well, they take to feeders as well, and so they get reasonably tame around people, and then bee hotels, particularly if they're in an open situation, they're going to investigate them because they're used to probing around in holes in wood.
Yeah.
So it's the sort of place they're going to find.
Okay. Is there any situation that's ideal for a bee hotel in the shade?
No. I mean, never put them in the shade, and that's the mistake I made when I first got one. So I thought they might like it in a shady spot, but what you got to do is put it on the warmest. If you've got a south-facing wall, that's ideal. But the warmest, sunniest spot that you can get, really, for a bee hotel.
Right.
That's the key. The bees love warmth, and they need that warmth, particularly the red mason bee, which is the commonest inhabitant of bee hotels. Really likes to get warmed up when it flies in April and May time, and so the bee hotel wants to be in a really nice warm position. What I usually do is I put them on the side of our shed, which is south facing, and the box which I showed you is one of the bee hotels I have, and I do actually remove it in the winter, so I put it in the garage in the winter and then stick it out again in March. And so it's in a stable environment, but it's out of the weather. As long as it's like the butterflies, as long as it's cool and not too dry, not too damp, in a stable environment over the winter, they'll be fine.
Are there any circumstances when you need to clean it out at all, or?
Well, if you're using bamboo canes, which I have, it's always best to put some new ones up each year. So if you've got occupied canes, what I do is I keep those in the garage over the winter, and then I bring them out in March, but I put them in a box just with a hole in to stick it up near my new batch of canes, which I put up. So the bees can emerge from the holes, merge out of the hole in the box, and then they won't nest again in those bamboo canes because it can build up disease and parasites.
Yeah.
So it's in this case, if you put up new canes, then they've got a new, fresh, new home. With the Nurturing Nature box, which I showed you, you can actually remove the perspex, and I actually remove all the nest cells from inside and just keep those separately and just clean out the whole thing and then just set it up again.
Yeah, so replenish your canes each year.
Yes,
basically. Yeah. Okay, that's good. I'll have to make a note of that. Every year we get smalls. This is from Simon again. Every year we get swarms of small flies around our outhouse in October, a bit like fruit flies. The bats love them. They appear from rolled up
it's choir mats.
Yeah. Any ideas what they are and what they might be eating?
I don't know. No idea. I'd have to have a look at a picture. I might not know then. There's a lot of flies. I'm not a real expert on flies, but I know some of them. But if you can send me a picture, I'll do my best.
And send them to you.
yeah. Catch some, and I might be able to do it, or send me a photo, and I might get an idea of what they are.
Thank you.
Here's a good question from Andrew Smearden. How does the cuckoo know which colour eggs to lay? Does one cuckoo stay faithful to the same host species all its life?
Yeah, well, female cuckoos will only lay in eggs of the bird which raised her. So that's why. So you get different. They're called genres of cuckoos,
Yeah.
And they so you get on Dartmoor, they're meadow pipit cuckoos. On the Somerset levels, they're reed warbler cuckoos, and so they've actually developed this association with their host due to the fact that the females will go back to the bird which raised them. Occasionally, you do say a cuckoo had an egg lined up for a meadow pipit nest, and then something happened to that nest. It's still got to lay that egg, so it will go and dump it in another bird's nest. So they have turned up in windchat nests. Usually they fail, but occasionally they do get reared by the windchat. So if that was a female cuckoo, she would go back and lay her egg in a windchat nest. Again, likelihood it would fail the next time. But there was a cuckoo in Yarner Wood a few years ago, which was laying eggs in wren's nests.
Right.
So that was obviously one which come off the moor, maybe, laid an egg in a wren's nest, and then it was successcul. And then she was
that was successful because a wren's egg is quite different, isn't it?
Yeah. So I didn't ever get a chance to see that, but quite an amazing thing to see. There is a record not from the UK, but from the continent, of a pair of goldcrests raising a cuckoo, which must be quite an amazing thing. That's
astonishing.
Like little bumblebees flying around the cuckoo.
Do you know what the reason for the absence of lowland cuckoos now? Or is it?
It's almost certainly to do with agricultural improvement and the decline in hairy caterpillars. When the cuckoos come back in spring, usually it's just about the time when all the big hairy caterpillars are out, and cuckoos are specially adapted to feed on these. They're able to actually absorb the hairs of the caterpillars in their gut lining, and every now and again they'll just cough up the lining of their gut and remove the hairs. So they're specially adapted to feed on them. But in the last 30, 40 years, the changes in agriculture in lowland, you can certainly notice it on Dartmoor. When I first came to live in Devon, there were cuckoos off the moor, but now there aren't any. And it's largely due to not a total destruction of these hairy caterpillars, but a massive reduction in the biomass of them, so the numbers of them. Whereas if you go up onto Dartmoor, there's lots, because of the rough grassland, there's lots of big hairy caterpillars. And the same in the Somerset levels, where there's drinker moth caterpillars on the reeds. And to a certain degree in smaller areas like the East Devon Pebblebed Heaths, places like the New Forest, you can always see it's all these places which are slightly rougher grassland or open country, and there's always this big supply of caterpillars for them to feed on.
Those hairy caterpillars, what species of butterflies, moths would they? Yeah,
things like oak eggers they'll feed on. Fox moths, drinker moths are typical ones. They'll also feed, I've seen them on the Scilly Isles feeding on burnet moths, so they're able to feed on the toxic burnet moth caterpillars. They also feed on a wide range of other caterpillars as well. And again, the numbers of those, all caterpillars, have declined off the moor, whereas up on Dartmoor, you do occasionally get these big outbreaks of caterpillars in the oak woods, and the cuckoos do feed on those as well. So it's really the abundance of this caterpillar food, which is at a key point really, when they've just flown all the way back from the Congo, right across the Sahara Desert, right through Europe to here. They need that food supply for them to be able to breed. And I'm sure that is the cause of why it's so noticeable that they've disappeared off the moor, but there's still, once you cross the national park boundary and you're up on the moor, there's still lots of cuckoos here, thankfully.
I'm fortunate enough to have a sister-in-law that lives up in Ullapool, and when you go up there in the valleys, when you're travelling down the valleys, you can hear the cuckoos calling. They're still quite prevalent.
That same rough grassland, and again in Ireland as well. I was up in Ireland a couple of years ago, and it's a similar situation there, where you've got these rough, extensive areas of rough grassland and moorland with these good supply of caterpillars.
Okay. Another one from Tom Morris here. When is the best time to see the wasp spider at Bovey Heathfield?
Usually sometime in August, September, they become full grown. So Bovey Heath's a good place for them. Chudley Knighton Heath's good as well, and also along the coast. So, but yeah, late August, September is the best time to see them.
I saw one at at the Newton Abbot beekeepers premises across the other side of the A38
Oh, right,
from
yeah.
Chudley Knight
Yeah.
and Heath there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, there's a lot around that area, and they're on the grass verges there as well along the A38.
yeah, they're quite stunning, aren't they?
Oh, it's beautiful.
Okay, I think we've exhausted all the questions, unless anybody else has got one that they want to feed through. No. Okay, thanks, John. Thanks for comprehensively answering those.
Yeah, thank you so much, John. It was very,
That's
very
right. Thanks,
interesting.
Simon.
And I'm sure our members, if they could, will give you a virtual clap, but we've muted them all. So on their behalf, we'll give you a round of applause. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
So just to tip everybody the wink, our next talk will be by Hannah Gibbons, and same time, same place, third Tuesday of the month, 7:30, talking about colour in the margins and arable plant species. I hope you'll all be able to join us. I'll be sending out a newsletter imminently with details of how to sign up for that, and a few other articles as well. Thank you so much to those who have sent articles and the details of wildlife spotting and marvellous pictures and things like that. And bit by bit, we'll be feeding them into the newsletter so that you can all hear about them. But if anyone does have any interesting sightings, findings, stories relating to wildlife in the area, then please let me know. And we can put pictures into the newsletter. So send them through to the local group email address, and we'll get them in there so everybody can share in your experiences. So once again, thank you, John, and a very good evening to you all.